Welcome to the second video in our Seriously Pro SP3 Mini series. In the first video we spent some time actually looking at the board and going through some of the basics, and in this video what we're going to do is we're going to flash the firmware onto this thing, do the basic setup, connect the receiver, pop it in a frame and take it for its first test hover. Now we've already done an awful lot on the Seriously Pro SP3 and Clean Flight systems already, so you can find those on the channel. So this is more about what's particular and peculiar to this board rather than trying to be everything and all subjects about it. So if you want to know about how to set up things like LEDs or add GPS or those pieces, then go and have a watch at one of these other videos that we've done for the full-size SP3. All you have to do is just find the corresponding pin on this board using the manual and connect whatever it is that you're looking at up to the relevant pin on here rather than the bigger brother. So that being said, let's talk about how you're going to get Clean Flight onto this board. Now it needs to be the latest and greatest version of Clean Flight. As we're making this video, it's about 1.12. That's the first version that supports this, but this board, as we talked about in the first video, operates in a slightly different way. It uses something called DFU mode. Now for those of you that have watched any of the Tyrannus videos, you'll know a little bit about DFU mode because it's how you get hold of the actual internal memory of the radio and how you flash the firmware, and this is going to follow a similar number of steps. So let's just very quickly talk about the two ways that you can normally flash a flight controller. The first one is by having the flight controller reboot into DFU mode, and again you can actually force it into DFU mode by using the two pins here, and this method is where you use something like a DFU utility to actually push the firmware file directly on to the flight controller. Now we've done that on things like the Team Black Sheep Power Cube series, where we actually used exactly that kind of process to get everything up on that STM32 F3 flight controller, and it works great. The challenge is if you want to use the Clean Flight version, which is the way we're going to do it in this video, is you need an extra little bit of software, because the way it works is that Clean Flight is expecting to talk to a COM port, and you need a little bit of software in the middle called Zadig that's going to listen and intercept those DFU bits and pieces and the device on your computer and make it appear to Clean Flight as though it's a standard COM port. Now that Zadig piece of software is something that we've used in the Tyrannus videos with OpenTX to make it so that we can flash the firmware. We're going to have to use Zadig on here as well. So let's very quickly go onto the netbook and talk through some of those bits and pieces, and then what we'll do is we'll make sure that this board is happy, we can connect to it, we can talk to it, and we can configure it, and once we're happy with that, then we'll start actually soldering the pins on in preparation for putting it into a frame. We've downloaded Zadig already so that it can do the bits and pieces it needs to between the DFU boot mode of the flight controller and talking to Chrome, which is where Clean Flight lives. Now to get hold of that, the easiest thing to do is just search for Zadig download, or you can find it at zadig.akio.ie. It's all on there too. So I would go and get it. The version that we've downloaded here is version 2.2, and again, if this is something that you're a Tyrannus user, you'll know all about. Just stuck it on the desktop so we can run it easily. The only other thing we need to have a look at is we need to be ready to start Clean Flight. All of this information that we're about to go through is in the Clean Flight documentation already. I'll put a link in the description, but you can see here it talks about it and about the fact that in Windows there is a problem. So on other platforms it might be a little bit easier than this. Again, we're doing it this way and we'll see how it actually goes. This is genuinely the first time I've actually tried to flash this board with Clean Flight, so we're going to kind of learn a little bit together as we go through the process. The board itself is sat on the desk ready to go. We haven't got the USB cable plugged in, but hopefully that will give you an idea of what all the lights do as we go through this, and I can jump back to the board and show you what's going on if something weird and wacky is happening that we need to point out. So we'll need to start plugging things in. So let's actually power the board up, and then the drivers and things can appear on Windows. Now the thing with Windows is that it's going to look at the board in one of two ways. It's either going to be a standard board with a COM port where CleanFlight will talk to it absolutely fine, or it will be rebooting into DFU mode ready for flashing. So let's start CleanFlight. And CleanFlight is ready to go. We can see it's actually appeared as COM9. We could connect and talk to it, so it looks promising, like it might actually already have CleanFlight on it, but we're not going to do that. We're going to jump onto the firmware tab. We're going to choose a firmware board and type. You need to be really sure here that you're picking the SP Racing F3mini, not the SP Racing F3. If you pick that one, bad things will happen. So we're going to pick version 1.12. And then we're going to say load firmware online. What it'll do is go away and actually get hold of the 1.12 version of the file. And there it is, it's all in there. And it said loaded online firmware, super. We're going to click flash firmware. Now what's going to happen is the board is going to be rebooted into DFU mode, and then we'll probably struggle to talk to it. So let's try that. Flash firmware. Now, what we need to do is close this out. I'll just minimize it for now. We're going to have to look in the devices. And here is a new one that's unspecified. Device startup in progress. Let's just wait for it to finish loading the drivers for this, because this will be the device appearing as a DFU device. There we go. STM32 bootloader. So if I just double click on that, there it is. Shows that it's an STM device in DFU mode. This is very similar to the kind of thing that we do when we're playing with the Taranis. Now, the chances are that CleanFlight will not be happy about that, and we'll still be waiting for it. So what we need to do then is we need to use Zadig to replace this driver with another one. Let's just double click and start Zadig. We're going to go into options, list all devices. We're looking for the STM bootloader, and we're going to tell it that we want it replaced by Win USB and say replace driver. It'll take a second to do it. And now when the board appears in DFU mode, rather than look like that, it'll actually look like a standard Windows USB device, and we can still talk to it through CleanFlight. Now, as per the instructions, the Chrome bits and pieces might need to be restarted, but let's give it a go now that's done. So we'll jump back into CleanFlight. What I'm going to do is I'm going to disconnect everything. I'm going to unplug the board, and then we'll restart it all, and then that way, hopefully, when it all restarts, it'll pick up the new driver and we'll be in business. We can get rid of Zadig, we don't need that anymore. Start CleanFlight. I'm going to plug the board back in. We're going to go back into flashing. We're going to choose the right firmware again. We're going to make sure again we're choosing Mini. Great, fab. Load the firmware from online. That all looks good to go again, and this time we're going to click flash firmware. Now what should happen is the board should reboot, but this time, because we have that Zadig piece in place, you can see we're actually working now. We're actually flashing the board, it can still talk to it, and we have a little thing up here as DFU. So that's the trick in order to get the Mini to be happy. So when this is finished and it reboots, then it will appear as a standard board and we can start to configure it. So now we've done that, and I'm happy that the board is all working. Let's go and stop the video there. Let me go and solder the bits and pieces onto it that we need to connect both the satellite receiver and also the motors too. Then we'll pop it into the frame, come back, configure it, and give it a flight. So this is what it looks like with all the bits on. So we've just installed the 4 connectors for the 4 motors we're going to need for a quadcopter here at the bottom, and at the other end we've also installed the cable for the satellite receiver. That's going to make it a little bit easier, and I've left this cable relatively long because I'm going to have to route it all the way to the back of the craft where the Spectrum receiver is going to fit. The other thing I've done is I've created and designed a little flat flexible mount that we can screw the board onto. That will just allow me to mount it onto the frame using nothing more than a bit of sticky tape. It also provides a nice flat level base so that when we calibrate the accelerometers and the other pieces too, that should all work fine. So let's go see what it looks like when it's in the frame. Here it is. This is the Warrior 200. I've just taken the top off it, which is this piece here, so we can see it a little bit more clearly. What I've done is I've used that mount just to pop it as close to the middle as I can get it, and then I've routed the cable for the receiver out the back. And the Warrior is quite nice. It has a little gap in here that's going to fit in there perfectly, but you can see it kind of fits quite nicely. I've already bound this to my radio using another receiver, but in the series later on we'll do a quick tip about how you access the bind mode using the buttons and whatnot if we want to rebind this or change the settings. The other thing that you'll notice here is that on the Warrior all of the motors are numbered. So we have motors 1, 2, 3 and 4. If however I put a graphic up here on the left hand side of how CleanFlight does the motor numbers, it's completely different. So what I've had to do is the left hand connection here is motor 1, it goes motor 1, 2, 3, 4, is I've had to then figure out which number on the arms is which and then connect them up to the right input. So for example, this is motor 1 in CleanFlight down here. It's called motor 3, so I've had to plug the tab that has number 3 written on, which you can probably just about see there, into motor 1. Motor 2 in CleanFlight is this one up here, which luckily is called number 2 on here as well, so that was easy. I've just plugged motor 2 into the second connection. Motor 3 in CleanFlight is actually this one down here, so I've had to plug in motor 4 into the third connection, and then the last motor's gone into the last connection. That's a little bit confusing. I did say in the review of the video that it's probably worthwhile calling these A, B, C and D because different flight controllers have different numbers, and for a new pilot or builder it could be very easy for you to plug the numbers into the outputs you think they are and then flip horrendously when you take off. There's only a couple of other things I'm doing to the frame to modify it. First is that I've clipped off the JST connector and I've put on one of these, an XT60. That's because the kind of batteries that I'm expecting to use with this, these kind of things like a 1300 milliamp hour, have XT60s on them already. The other adaptation I'm going to make is I'm going to just cut a relief in here very slightly, because at the moment there's no way that I can put a battery strap here at the bottom. So I'm just going to pop this bottom plate off and then with a little nail file or a needle file just cut a very small relief so I can get a battery strap on, and that hopefully should then be good enough. But before we get into all that, what we're going to do is we're going to plug the board back into CleanFlight and we can go through the configuration very quickly, make sure it's all happy, make sure all the motors are working and calibrated, then we can close this up and take it for its first flight. In CleanFlight there's only a couple of things that we need to do to get this board flying basically. The first thing we need to do is to calibrate the accelerometer and the magnetometer. Now to calibrate the accelerometer is really easy, just keep it on a level surface and click the button. Calibrate magnetometer is a little bit more complicated, you have to twist the model around all the ways. Going into configuration, you can see the layout of the motors, so make sure that that is the same as the model. When we run the motors, we're going to check that each of them is in the right direction. If any of them is turning in the wrong direction, we'll change any 2 of the 3 wires that connect them to the ESC. The only other things I've done on here is turned on motor 1 stop. I don't like my motors turning when I arm the board. If we scroll down, the only other thing we've done in here is turned on receiver serial and selected the Spectrum satellite receiver. Now if you click save and reboot and it doesn't stick or it keeps resetting for this bit, then what you need to do is go back to ports, select serial RX for UART3, click save and reboot, and then when you go back into configuration and then reselect serial receiver and the Spectrum bits and bobs that you want, it should then stick. We had to do that here to get everything working, but then it was fine. If it is working, when you go into receiver, you'll be able to see your radio, and as you move the controls, it'll all move. The thing that you have to be careful of is make sure that the range is going from just above 1,000 to just below 2,000, and that the middle is about 1,500. Use your sub trims and endpoints on the radio to make that happen. Our auxiliary switch that we've set up for the modes is auxiliary 2. If you find that any of the channels are in the wrong order, then that probably means that the channel map is wrong. So what you need to do is you just need to go up here and select one of the other options. Once you've done that, then we can go into modes and select the modes you want set up. So obviously we've selected auxiliary 2 because that's the mode switch that's working for us, and we've set it so that in the low position it's arm, that's the range. In the middle position it flicks to horizon, and top position it goes to horizon and barometer. So now we've done that, we've done most of the basic stuff. We're ready to have a go and to fire up the machine for the first time with the motors, making sure that the props aren't attached. So let's go onto the bench and just do that very quickly, just see if it all works. If it does, we can pop the props on and then try our first test hover. And as you can see here, this is quite a cute part of the model. We have the red LEDs at the back, really lovely bright white LEDs at the front. I'm going to arm the board by holding the throttle stick at its lowest right hand position. The red light comes on, and then as I bring the throttle up, there's all the motors starting, and they're all turning in the right direction. So all I need to do then is now pop the props on. We can go outside and give it a first test flight. Here we are in the back garden. We always do our first test flight just in the back garden in case anything goes wrong, and then it's easy to find all the bits, but also just a test. So we're going to arm the board, start the motors, and here we go. So it's hovering at 51% throttle. The actual weight of the entire model, including the battery, is 310 grams. And from the calculations and the testing we've been doing since the video, we're getting about 8 to 11 minutes out of a 1,300 milliamp hour battery. Now this is a really nice little model to fly, and the F3mini F3 is working really nicely. So for those of you that like the board, that like the look of it, don't forget we have a Seriously Pro F3 series that goes through all of the different details. The mini board is capable of everything that the larger board is. So if you want to do things like play with GPS, add sonar, add LEDs, all of that information is covered in those other videos. We will be doing other videos in this series later on to talk about things like the timing LEDs and other bits, but for those standard pieces, go and have a look. The other thing to mention, of course, is the frame that we've used in this video. This again is the Warrior 200. I'm going to put a link in the description so you can go and have a look at it. You can get it from uflyshop.com, and at the moment those guys are offering a 10% discount for any Painless 360 subscriber. All you do is you put Painless 360 all together, no spaces, all upper code in the checkout box, and that will save you some money on the frame as well. So thank you for watching the video and staying with us. Hopefully those of you that have the FP3mini board now know how to set it up and get it flying basically. Thank you for taking the time to watch that video. There are lots of other videos on the channel, and they're carefully ordered into playlists, so you may find that there are other videos on this same subject that you can go and watch. So I would recommend going into the playlist area of Painless 360 YouTube channel and looking around and seeing what there is. You never know what you might find. Thanks for watching. Please like, subscribe, and happy flying.